Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
And saying good morning now to Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower, who's in the studio with us this morning. Good morning, Gary.
Hi there, Brian. How are you doing?
Doing well, doing well. That was kind of interesting, Jonathan, talking about that teenage boy from Germany back in the late 1980s.
Yeah, who flew a plane right into Red Square. But if you fly that plane at a very low altitude, you can avoid radar. And I think that some of it was simply a surprise. A single plane, a very small plane. Whatever you can say about Soviet air defenses didn't work very well on that particular day.
What a high school prank.
Yeah, some prank. Hey, I wanted to mention a couple things before we get going. Number one, one of your advertisers is Vanderview Golf Course. And I was out there yesterday. Vanderview is a wonderful little golf course, a 9-hole course, very inexpensive. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's something like $7 for 9 holes, $100 for an entire season's pass. And I asked the fellow who ran it, his name is Tony, how are they doing? And he looks upstairs. The rain has been, not only continual in this area, but it is really playing havoc with golf courses. So I think that whether we're talking about Vanderview or other courses, if you do play golf, get out there and support your local courses. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there is a policeman on the Hornell force. I'm not positive whether he's still there. His name is Bob Margison. He had once upon a time been on the Alfred Police Department. Very, very smart guy. He's an interesting fellow. He, among other things, is an assistant coach on the Alfred University football team, but he just wrote a book. He wrote a novel. It's called Tribulation's Fate. I'm not crazy about the title, but it's a very, very good novel. So if any of you know Bob Margison, or if any of you want to read
long-time Hornell police officer and area coach, what's the book about?
It's a novel. It's kind of a crime novel, as you could well imagine, given his police background. But and I don't know. I'm sure it's going to be available on Amazon. But yeah, I mean, if we're supporting local people, think about Bob Margison, Tribulation's Fate.
That's very interesting. Thanks for the info there. Okay, getting to our regular show topics. You'd like to talk about the Pelosi video.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing. What happened over the course of the weekend is that a video of Nancy Pelosi criticizing the president. The president had been criticizing Nancy Pelosi, so it's kind of a tit for tat, tat for tit. But someone in the Republican National Committee, I believe it was, then took the video of Pelosi's criticism of Trump and slowed it down. In other words, they created a fake video so that Nancy Pelosi appears to be drunk and appears to be slurring her words and whatnot. It's good old-fashioned dirty tricks, except it's more than just dirty tricks, because the President of the United States then took the tape of the fake video and he posted it on his Twitter account, and now I think 2 or 3 or 4 million people have seen the thing. I think that most of you, if anyone's interested, can undoubtedly find it on YouTube. I find this kind of thing to be just indefensible. When you're taking fake information and you're putting it into the political realm, you're essentially undermining the very, very meaning, if you will, of a democratic political system. We're going to see more of this. I'm sure we're going to see more of it as we lead up to the campaign in 2020. And it also suggests something else. I mean, what Trump is trying to do by releasing this kind of a video is to say that she's not. She's sick, okay, that she's crazy. Well, Nancy Pelosi is anything but crazy. But you may remember, some of them, I'm sure our listeners will certainly remember, that during the campaign in 2015 and 2016, some of the Republicans essentially argued that Hillary Clinton had a stroke. and that therefore she was not up to.
Because she kept slipping and things like that, slipping physically.
Yeah,
there was
exactly.
a video of her slipping
Right,
coming
exactly.
down the staircase.
That she wasn't the person that she was because of the stroke, that it affected her mind. Well, this is also very, very fake stuff, and it came out of Roger Stone. One shouldn't be all that surprised. As a matter of fact, it initially was a suggestion by a fellow named Jerome Corsi, who has on occasion actually been broadcast on this station, and then he made the suggestion to Roger Stone, and then Roger Stone suggested it to others, and eventually, of course, it became part of the dialogue of 2016. I think that when we do this sort of thing, we are shooting ourselves in the foot. We are undermining our democratic process. We are undermining the notion of a genuinely free informational election.
On the Pelosi video, a Google search of that turns up a headline from the Washington Post that says Facebook won't block the faked Pelosi video. Mark Zuckerberg there, the head of Facebook, he finds himself in quite a situation because he wants to be able to say that he can promote freedom of speech, but at the same time, things pop up like this or other things, and he gets accused of blocking certain things and not others. He's in quite the situation there.
There are, if I'm not mistaken, around 2 billion people who are on Facebook. How many of those folks are on there every single day? I don't know. How many posts onto Facebook they offer? I don't know. I just don't think that Facebook has the ability, not just Facebook, but Twitter, but any of these social media, have the ability to police it in a very, very effective way. Now, having said that, there are literally millions upon millions of fake Facebook accounts that have been removed. So I think that Facebook is probably doing a reasonable job, but they can't do everything. They can't police every single post that's going to appear. And then I think the other point is exactly what you said. On one level, there's a kind of free media, and that free media even includes the right of people to lie, the right of people to, if you will, fake the news. Can you deal with that in a very effective way? I think Facebook is probably saying, no, we're going to err on the side of people, making their own judgments, because there's also, of course, information, including from Nancy Pelosi, indicating that this is in fact not a real video. I think that this is a debate that has existed now for 2 or 3 or 4 years. I mean, we didn't have social media until around 2005 or so, but this debate is not going away. Should Facebook remove something like this? In my own opinion, the answer is yes. When it's clearly fake, when it's clearly designed to undermine, again, that democratic process, I think that they do have an obligation to do it, but they're never going to be able to, to identify all of these things. And we know what happened in 2016 when the Russians sent thousands upon thousands of disinformation kind of videos to Facebook.
And another problem, not to get off on the whole show on Zuckerberg, but another problem that Zuckerberg occasionally faces and the Facebook team occasionally faces, usually younger, but criminals will take video of crimes that they commit. Usually they're like assault-related, kidnapping-related type things. Usually I would suspect these are drugged-up teenager kind of crimes. Or then you have the crimes where someone says that they're going to go into whatever, a school or a church and commit some horrific type of crime there. I'm guessing that Facebook and the NSA possibly work together on stuff like that, or maybe the NSA just picks up when people are putting out threats.
Brian, I don't know the answer to that. I do know that when those kinds of videos appear on Facebook, Facebook will remove them. Once they're alerted to it, they will remove that. Anything, in other words, which involves a clear-cut crime is, off the record on this one. Now, Facebook will take it down. But, often those things are up for 3 or 4 or 5 hours before they're taken down. And by that time, they are, sent, broadcast by other Facebook accounts to thousands, hundreds of thousands thousands and occasionally even millions of people. We all thought that social media was going to be a great kind of democratic opening up of communication. Well, it is, but there's a downside to it. There's an ugly side to that. And of course, what you're describing right now is a good example of exactly some of these dangers. And to the extent that it creates, if you will, a willingness for others to do these, so-called copycat crimes, it becomes even more, kind of metastasizes. It becomes even more of a problem than it initially was.
Talking to Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. By the way, Dr. Ostrower, we had a former history student of yours on yesterday. Hornell High School teacher Mark Smith came on and talked about the upcoming Civil War reenactment in Canasteel that's coming up this weekend.
This weekend, I didn't hear the program, and I'm glad to know that.
Yes, very interesting conversation. We talked about Lincoln, and we talked about Johnson, and had a great
I assume when you say
conversation.
Johnson, you meant the first President Johnson.
Yeah,
not
we
the
weren't
second
talking about
President
LBJ.
Johnson.
We were talking about Andrew Johnson.
Right. Who got himself impeached, I might add.
Yes, but as long as we're on the topic, your thoughts on Andrew Johnson and the post-Civil War era.
Yeah, Andrew Johnson was a Southern Democrat. Lincoln was a Republican. But Lincoln wanted a platform, so to speak, in 1860 when he ran for president that would be a unifying platform at a time when the country was very, very divided. And we all know what happened after Lincoln was in fact elected, namely, many of the southern states began to peel away, to secede, and when the war began, yet another 5 left. But in either case, Andrew Johnson...
Did some of that have to do with him being from Illinois?
Well, I mean, to the extent that he was from the North, and not only from the North, but he had a very, very clear record of opposition to slavery, and that was not going to... that wouldn't appeal, obviously, to any of the southern states that were hell-bent to defend the slavery system. And not only to defend the slavery system, but to defend the right of the southern states to expand slavery into the western territories. But in either case, Andrew Johnson is going to turn out to be one of the worst presidents in American history. We American historians like to rate our presidents. So at the very, very top of the heap will be Lincoln and FDR and George Washington. At the very, very bottom of that heap will be people like James Buchanan and Franklin Pierce, and certainly Andrew Johnson. He was not a person who should ever have become president in the first place. Of course, he became president upon the assassination of Lincoln, but he had a serious alcohol problem. He was a man who did not respect the law, similar to a guy who's in the White House right now, and eventually it got him impeached. He was not convicted. The House of Representatives impeached him, but he was not convicted by one single vote in the United States Senate. In 1867, when the Senate held a trial, he escaped by one single vote. But be it as it may, there's not a lot of respect for him by any American historians today, North or South.
We're going to take a quick break. We will be back with Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower.
McCourt's Auto Collision on State Route 36 just south of Canasteel is a full-service collision shop offering not just collision work, but also paint work. McCourt's has a 24-foot frame straightener with 3-dimensional measurement. McCourt's accepts all insurance companies and can work with you on any deductible you may have. At McCourt's, they work for your interest and your benefit, not the insurance companies. All work is fully warranted and they offer a free loaner car. McCourt's Auto Collision, State Route 36 in Canasteel, where customer satisfaction is always number one. Phone 607-698-9900.
Checking in now, meteorologist Rob Carroll. And Rob, before we do the local forecast, Dayton, Ohio area got hit by a tornado last night.
They did. They got walloped. A very large tornado hitting the northern suburbs of Dayton. There was so much debris that the Ohio Department of Transportation had to take snowplows out on I-75 to push the debris off the road, Brian. More than 5 million people without power in Ohio this morning. What's left of that system just went through Washington, D.C. with some heavy rainfall. It's associated with a low that's come out of Michigan, now moving across southeastern Ontario. That low will go right across New York State. It's why we're seeing the rainfall today. We'll get a brief break into tomorrow, a little while where we're dry, and then another wave will come out of the upper Midwest, and that will bring us some more showers tomorrow into tomorrow night and Friday. So we're going to stay unsettled. The problem continues to be, Brian, cool air to the north, Warm air to the south, the boundary right in between. We've been dealing with this all spring, and it looks like we will continue to deal with it as we head towards the start of summer in June. Today we'll have scattered showers. May even hear some rumbles of thunder. We're 70 to 75. Sunrise earlier today at 5:38. Sunsets tonight at 8:38. We're approaching 15 hours of daylight. Our max is about 15 hours and 20 minutes. We'll see that around the solstice, around June 20th. Showers end tonight. We're cloudy overnight, 50. Few showers are possible again tomorrow, 70 to 75. Maybe a stray shower tomorrow night, 55 to 60. Rain for Thursday, 70 to 75. That rain will move out Thursday night, and we'll see some sunshine develop Friday, Brian.
We're on live with Dr. Gary Ostrower, a longtime Alfred University history professor. What year did you start there?
I started teaching in 1969, so this is the end of my 50th year.
And dumb question, but didn't you go there?
I did. I was there from 1957 until 1961. So I've been around Allegheny County, Steuben County for a long, long time, right since the end of the Civil War.
Okay, looking at the other topics you wanted to cover besides Pelosi, cover-ups, income taxes, and tariffs.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment about the income tax. And the reason I do this is because I was listening to Newsmaker last week, and twice it came up about the congressional committee seeking Trump's tax returns. And some of the folks who were, interviewed last week, seemed to suggest that this is an invasion of privacy, that there's no no reason to do this, no right to do this, and so forth. If Trump's income tax returns are offered up to congressional investigators, and anyone's income tax returns can be opened. The fact of the matter is that Congress has a perfect right to see those tax returns. And the reason I say it has a perfect right is that in 1924, this is shortly after what was called the Teapot Dome scandal, and some of your listeners may have a recollection from their history courses about the Teapot Dome scandal during the Harding era. So Congress passed a law, and the law was initially to make those tax returns public of any public official under investigation. Then it was modified to say, no, we're not going to make it public. What we are going to do is we're going to make it available to congressional committees involved in legitimate investigations. And the law is crystal clear. There is absolutely no question that the president should have, well, it really would be through the Secretary of the Treasury, but the president's tax returns can be made public, not public, that can be made available to congressional committees investigating him, and that includes committees in the House of Representatives. For the president to refuse to turn over those tax returns, for the Secretary of Treasury, Mnuchin, to refuse to turn them over, I think is itself a potentially impeachable offense. But I want to make another comment, if I may, about this. The president said just as recently as last week that his administration is the most transparent administration in American history. And he said these words, that I have never, ever been involved in a cover-up. Well, I mean, we can see with our own eyes there are cover-ups. The fact that he won't release those tax returns represents something of a cover-up. The fact that he was paying with his own signature on checks a total of $130,000 to Stormy Daniels to cover up an affair that he had with her, belies what he tells us. This president is not very truthful. I've certainly said this on that program before, and I'll say it again. I think that, if you're going to support President Trump, you do so, but understand what you're getting into, because a lack of transparency, a false narrative ultimately undermines the very, very truth that we need as a bedrock, as a foundation for any kind of a democratic system.
What about tariffs? You had that on your list of things.
Yeah, the tariff thing is, I'm afraid, is going to become more troublesome rather than less. We were all hoping, I think, that the issue of the tariffs, the threat of tariffs on Chinese goods would be over, would simply, let the, would, how shall I say it, persuade the Chinese to open up their markets to American goods and to end some of the intellectual property violations that the Chinese have been engaged in literally for decades. That's not happening. We're seeing that this whole issue is becoming more rather than less troublesome. As most of us know, about 2 weeks ago, the president imposed 25% tariffs on approximately $200 billion worth of Chinese goods coming into the United States. The Chinese retaliated with tariffs on $60 billion worth of American goods that are moving into China. Now, the president has said, winning a tariff war is easy, but we're finding out that it's anything but easy. And when the president says the Chinese are going to pay for all the subsidies that we're giving to American farmers to protect them against, the losses of their own markets in China, the fact is that no, the Chinese are not paying that. The American public is paying that. The American public is going to pay higher prices as we impose tariffs on goods coming in from China. In other words, a tax on goods coming in from China. And by the same token, the American public is going to pay again for the $24 billion or $26 billion that we're paying to American farmers to cover their own losses in respect to soybeans and wheat and other things that we have been sending to China. One has to hope that, common sense is going to prevail. But at this point, it seems to me that we're going to pay a very, very high price. And Brian, I want to say one other thing, if I may, in respect to the issue of tariffs. And that is that, let's assume, for instance, that the Chinese are imposing tariffs on American cars that are being imported into China. Okay, that not only hurts, let's say, Ford and General Motors, but it's also going to hurt American steel producers. It's also going to hurt Pittsburgh Plate Glass. It's going to hurt Goodyear, that's making the tires for those cars. So in other words, this tariff war is going to have effects. It's going to have an effect that is going to be far beyond only the $200 billion coming one way, the $60 billion going the other way. It's not, it could undermine the American economy, and that's exactly what happened, I might add, when tariffs were increased back during the 1930s.
Down to the last 60 seconds on this day in history, Dr. Ostrower. It says on the History Channel's website, Lieutenant Colonel George Washington began the 7 Years' War.
Well, the 7 Years' War was what we call on this side of the Atlantic the French and Indian War. George Washington was a young soldier from Virginia, of course. He became involved in that, what we call, the French and Indian War. He distinguished himself, and by distinguishing himself in the French and Indian War, he would eventually be then selected to become the commander of American troops during the American Revolution. So one can argue that, and I think that no historian would disagree with this, that his military career really begins back in the 1750s during that earlier conflict. He distinguished himself, as I say, and of course he will even greater distinguish himself during the war to follow. There are a whole series of wars back in that period. We call it the Second 100 Years' War between England and France, and the French and Indian War, and then the American Revolution were simply two of about 7 or 8 of those different wars.
Well, we have to leave it there, but as always, Dr. Ostrower, I want to thank you so much for coming in.
Well, thank you very much.
It was a coalition of environmentalist wackos.